Good morning. I would now like to call to order the May 10th, 2023 meeting of the Indiana State Board of Education. Roll call, please.
Good morning. Mr. Bass.
Present.
I'll take this here. Ms. DeLosa.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Durham.
Present.
Dr. Ernest.
Present.
Mr. Gastineau.
Present.
Ms. Hamill.
Here.
Mr. Mates. Ms. Moat.
Here.
Ms. Rensselaer.
Here.
Mr. Watts. Dr. Jenner.
Present.
We have a quorum.
All right, excellent. Is there well, actually, let's stand for the pledge first. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion. Second.
Motion second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the April 12th, 2023 meeting?
Move to accept the minutes from the previous meeting.
Second.
The motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. So a few updates for the board since we last met. One of the biggest things that we're all aware of is our Indiana General Assembly wrapped up legislative session. As I was visiting with audience members, I came upon one of our Indiana General Assembly members, Representative Julie McGuire. So Representative McGuire, why don't you stand up and wave to everyone? So thank you, Representative McGuire, and thank you to the other 149 members as well who served for 4 months, who serve every day, 365 days, but those 4 months where they're setting policy, it is intense, it is a push, and we had a lot of successes in K-12 education. I outlined some of that in Friday's weekly newsletter. If you saw that, if you didn't, that's online. You're welcome to. But I do want to elevate just a few things. Tuition support was increased by $1.47 billion over the biennium. Increased options for student choice were provided. Elevating the science of reading. We asked for about 30 million and I think ended up with about 70 million in science of reading support for our schools and teachers. Funding textbooks for our students and families. By the way, for schools listening, that guidance will go out today. Prioritizing STEM education, making sure we have high quality STEM for all of our students. Launching Dolly Parton's Imagination Library statewide. Yesterday I was with state librarians and they were very excited to link arms with us on the science of reading and making sure we get more books in hands of kids. Supporting school safety, an increase there. Expanding early learning and childcare opportunities so that income threshold was increased, as well as the requirement for the modernization of the paths to quality. Increasing college affordability and access. You probably saw that 21st Century Scholars is now auto-enroll. So schools will not have to, try to recruit kids to sign up. It's now auto-enroll. And then there's also a FAFSA requirement by high school graduation. Redesigning school accountability. The General Assembly provided us the opportunity to provide recommendations to the General Assembly by December 1st of 2024, which we will eagerly work on and be ready to provide. Rethinking high school. Speaker Houston says reinventing high school. You choose what you prefer to call it, but the main thing is that we're making sure all our children have access to high-quality post-secondary credentials, high-quality work-based learning, and that rethinking high school is really a lot of what we're going to start talking about today, because part of that legislation allows us as a board, working with stakeholders, to redesign our high school diplomas and add increased flexibility. Accelerating student learning. The department was provided a block grant to support accelerating student learning, science of reading, several other different pieces. So we'll be working again with our schools and community partners to, you remember we heard from St. Joseph County Boys and Girls Club, as well as the Mind Trust and United Way of Central Indiana, who came in and shared some of their successes. So we'll be investing in more of the successes there. Then also an increase to support non-English speaking students, as well as special education students. So that's just a quick list. You know, a lot of really good things happened in the K-12 space. So really appreciative of our General Assembly and all the voices who came to the State House on the daily to express your thoughts and opinions in order to get the best possible policy in Indiana. Also, and I think this is coming up, the governor is naming 4 students to his 2023 STEM team, or at least they're coming to his office either tomorrow or in the next coming days. So congratulations to the winner in science, Ethan Kiang from Bloomington High School. He's at Bloomington South High School. He's a senior. In the technology area, Brianna Peratt from Center Grove High School. In the engineering area, Katie Essex from Southport High School. And then in mathematics, Catherine Yu from Carmel High School. Those students were named as the governor's STEM team. We also announced last week that nominations are now open for the 2023 Educational Excellence Awards. That's also what we called, not by brand, because we can't use the brand, but the Education Oscars, right? It's when we had a black tie event to honor our educators across the state. That event is set for early September, second year, early September this year. And if you remember, last year we gave away about $4.6 million to further support the positive momentum and growth in these schools and areas. And some of that was even to support other schools to share what they're doing. But this year we've opened up more of even a people's choice way of considering this. So we can look at quantitative data all day long, and that's how we awarded the recipients last year. But this year we'd like to also hear from Hoosiers and hear from people. What are our best STEM schools? Who is doing the best job with early literacy? Beyond just what our iRead scores, but who's scaling science of reading, right? Who has the best, or one that we need to highlight, community collaboration, working with partners. Those nomination forms are on our website. We would encourage anyone who would like to highlight a school, please get on there and fill out one of those forms, and we'll be announcing those again at that September Educational Excellence Awards. Also, earlier this week, we announced our 2022-2023 STEM certified schools. We have 19 schools who are newly certified as leaders in STEM education. This adds on to those who are already STEM certified. So thank you and congratulations to those schools. Today we'll have 2 presentations for the board to hear. One is on foster youth. That's an annual report that we hear. And then the other one is really a kickoff to our high school redesign conversation. And we'll hear the diploma landscape analysis from Assistant Secretary Callahan, as well as Insightful Ed Solutions. And I'll introduce them more when it's time. Is there any board comment or report? I did see Scott Bass was highlighted or your schools were highlighted in the New York Times. Any words? I mean, that's pretty cool.
That was very cool. Just to have them reach out to us and say, hey, we've heard what you guys are doing, and obviously the building we're in on that side of town is really interesting. And then to highlight the academic things we're doing was really cool. So happy about that.
Yeah, congratulations for that. And then I also saw via text this morning that one of our board members who's not here today, Pat Mapes, is a granddad as of 10:01 p.m. last night. So congratulations to Pat Mapes. Xavier Lennon was born at 10:01 last night, 7 pounds, 13 ounces, 20.5 inches long. So he's a grandpa. Any other board comments or reports? All right, seeing none, we'll now shift to public comment. First is Kendra Johnson.
Good morning to each and every one of you.
Morning.
As always, I am honored to stand before you representing and sharing stories of parents from the past, present, and, as I often say, the future concerning education. And as I was getting up this morning, I was being rushed. And I thought about what to talk on today. And what comes to me is we're almost at the end of the school year. So what do we need to do? Well, for one thing, we need to look at everything that has already happened and take it in consideration and use that information to plan for the next year to come. That means assessments and tests. We need to we need to encourage and congratulate those individuals that are going to graduate, those individuals that made improvements, and those individuals who have made it to the end. We need to think about those we've lost and what effect that they had on our lives, and how do we maintain that legacy and their legacy when it comes to education. And so being involved as I have since 1996 in terms of education, I always look at how can I do better, how can I be better, and what have I learned from the past? Well, now my concern is we're about to come to the end of a legislative year, and it was a money year. So now, what's to happen next? What plans should be put into place in activities for parents? Summer's coming. What ideas do we give parents to further the education during the summer? Because a lot of kids think, okay, it's summer, no more school, have fun. Well, you can still have fun with education during the summer. And that's one of the things I deal with in my workshop. And, you know, as a grandmother, what have I got coming up now? I've got 2 graduations. I've got a little kindergartner being promoted. My little granddaughter that was born on the day of tragedy for our family. I have a young man that's about to graduate elementary school. I've got so many grandkids, I have to try and keep track of everybody. And it was hard for him, but he's made it. And so that's something I'm gonna celebrate, and then also help his mom and dad make their transition here. They're moving here to Indianapolis. So the whole family's coming here, so that's going to be fun to deal with. But as I said, and lastly, thank you. Thank you to all the educators. Thank you to all the administrators. Thank you for everyone, whether they were a custodian or whether they're the governor of the state of Indiana. Whatever part they played in terms of improving education for our children, thank you to them. And to the parents, thank you for making sure your children got to school, making sure that you were part of their education. And lastly, but most importantly, to the students. Don't give up. Keep going. You're appreciated. Someone, somewhere out there will be depending on you in the future. So they're investing in you now, so invest in yourself so you can be a great inspiration to others. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kendra, for bringing the parent voice always. And a couple of things that you mentioned reminded me of a couple things I forgot to mention. It is Teacher Appreciation Week. I know that nearly every school across our state, over 2,200 of them, are having daily pitch-ins and all sorts of things to celebrate our teachers. We do have a couple of teachers on our board, and Kristen's not avoiding eye contact, Greg is. Kristen and Greg, we're so glad to have you as board members and bringing that teacher voice always to the table. So thank you. We have one other public comment today. Hale Crumley.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So my name is Hale Crumley. I'm with Prosperity Indiana, and if you haven't heard of that, it's not as much in the education space, so it's okay. We are the statewide association for community economic development. We have over 200 members statewide. Most of our members are nonprofit organizations that do service provision, and also lots of banks and local governments. So I am Prosperity Indiana's coalition coordinator. So I'm part advocate. I go to the State House. It was a very long session. And I am also part convener of experts, as I like to say. So I'm not always the subject issue expert, but I know a lot of them all over the state. So one of the coalitions that I convene is called the Indiana Assets and Opportunity Network. And this group is over 7 years old. It has over 2,000 members across the state. Most of them are practitioners, lots of, again, nonprofit service providers. And as you can imagine, the focus of this group is asset building, particularly for low-income Hoosiers. So a big point of interest for this group, ever since its inception, was financial education. And as I'm sure all of you know, there was actually a successful bill this session that strengthens it in our schools, which is really exciting for us. And I know, Dr. Jenner, you worked on this. I was very close with Senator Gaskill and Representative Hall and Representative King on this issue. So thank you very much. We were extremely excited to see that pass. And so something I wanted to offer to this group is any help or assistance you might want with curricula development. I don't want to assume that you guys need help. You are all amazing, amazing experts. But if it would alleviate the load on your shoulders, we would love to. We have an extremely qualified steering committee of people who have been teaching specifically financial literacy for over a decade in Indiana, most of them. We have, for instance, the director of financial education for all of Old National Bank on our steering committee, who's been doing this for, I think, about 15 years. We also have, for example, the director of financial education and wellness for Indiana University, who's also been doing this for over a decade. Just experts like that who really, really want to share with you what they know about this and would love to help. We would also really like to put forth the idea of potentially us sponsoring an annual conference for teachers to attend, probably for free, to familiarize themselves with the curricula and really become aware of resources available to them, because there are so many out there and they don't have to start from scratch, and we want them to know that. So we are really interested in helping with that curricula development. We are really interested in potentially putting on this conference every year. We would love to collaborate with you guys. So I wanted to let you know that, and again, thank you for anyone else who was involved I may not know of for working on that legislation. We are so excited. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Hale. It's always really outstanding for us as a board to have a community partner, state partner come in and say, hey, link arms with us. We want to be part of the solution with you. So we'll definitely share your information forward with our academics team as they gear up to implement a lot of different legislation, but specifically that one I did not mention in the highlights. One of several that I could have mentioned. Senator Gaskell and Representative Hall were fantastic to work with, and as a board, we affirmed the Indiana Graduates Prepared to Succeed characteristics is essentially our Indiana profile of a grad. And one of those elements that we heard from Hoosiers is financial literacy. And so really appreciate our General Assembly partners for elevating that as well. And again, thank you for your comments, Hale. All right, that is the end of public comments. So we will now move to consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion?
Second. The motion and a second. I'm going to kick off the discussion just real quick. A couple of things for the board to know. Item E through R are all specifically educator prep programs. And so a couple of board members had the question, and it's a great one that our general public might have as well, about are all of these aligned to science of reading? Because of course that was a big session for science of reading. So what we will do as a board to keep the flow of our ed prep programs, the legislation allows them until July 1 of 2024 to develop a course and prepare for that. So we will, what I'd ask you to do is we'll go ahead and affirm these today, and then we will ask our ed prep programs to come back to us once their science of reading course is developed, because we know that is key for our future pipeline of teachers. That's one thing I wanted to point out. The other one, just real quick, is item S, the school year 23-24 average daily membership count days. That was another piece of legislation that passed. It was something that as a department we were very much for, because for years and years and years our schools have had 2 count days. We have over 1 million students in Indiana, so 2 days we have spent within about 2 weeks of each other on counts. And mainly that was just because of we had an old state law on the books, and then we had a federal law that wouldn't allow us to count before October 1. So now I'm really thankful that the General Assembly has allowed us to align those dates. That helps our schools, no doubt, with some of the paperwork, and will help us to have one single count of students in Indiana. So those are the two. Any other discussion? Any recusals? All right, seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right, let's shift to new business and go to the foster youth report. Koyana Jones, who is the DOE foster youth and social work specialist, if you could come on up, and Melania Gant, who's the Director of Education Services at Department of Child Services. We're eager to hear your presentation. Thank you.
So good morning. My name is, again, Koyana Jones. I'm the Foster Youth and Social Work Specialist at the Department of Education.
And I'm Melina Gant, and I am the Director of Education Services with the Indiana Department of Child Services.
We worked together to compile the report for the 2021-2022 school year, and we did, the report is available online, but we did condense it into some slides. And so, of course, this report is required per Indiana code. We did see a significant decrease in children being removed from their home and placed in out-of-home care. And so those numbers are intentional through DCS to ensure that children can remain in their homes. And so that was a 28.1% decrease. And then with that, we did see that 4.2% of youth in out-of-home care were under the age of 1, and so they did not make it into this report because they weren't of school age. So approximately 91.6% of Indiana's foster youth are enrolled in traditional public schools. And from that percentage, we did find that foster youth are twice as likely to need a graduation waiver. They're twice as likely to be retained when compared to their peers. And most students, regardless of their subgroup, were retained in that kindergarten level. Suspensions and expulsions have increased since we have returned to in-person learning, and the Indiana, the IYI data book, did note that that was because students have been out of school and they have not been in school to learn those social skills.
But one thing that we do want to highlight is that these statistics haven't changed in the 5 years that we have been compiling this data. So our youth are still twice as likely to receive a graduation waiver as they have been for the last 5 years. The suspension and expulsion rates are continually increasing every year for our population. So these are significant issues that we believe we have resources to help combat, but we need some stronger buy-in from our local authority to utilize the resources that the DOE has prepared, like the positive discipline guide that was prepared by Brandy Oliver. That is an amazing resource that needs to be highlighted much more frequently so that our exclusionary discipline is not utilized so frequently, especially with our traumatized populations. Thank you.
And so we will continue to utilize the remediation plan from the previous report and then continue to build on that. And so we do want to, like Melena just said, incorporate positive discipline practices. We do want to ensure that our foster youth are supported in schools, and so whether that is through school guidance or other resources outside, and then also ensuring that our foster youth have access to First Step so they can be evaluated early on, and we can catch those behaviors.
And one really awesome thing about the Department of Child Services and First Steps is that they now have an MOU in place that has an automatic referral system for any child that comes into our care that may qualify for First Steps. They automatically receive a referral. Now, the program, of course, is voluntary, so parents have the right to choose whether or not they want to actually participate, but it does help us get at least more people aware of the program so that we can get those children that are in need of those type of interventions engaged in the program. It is helping. We've noticed that. It is helping. We have a higher participation, but we need higher. Children need to be coming into kindergarten with more skill set.
And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that update. Any questions from the board?
Can I ask one? And I love this, so great job with this report. Do we know, because some of this is alarming, right? And as you said, 5 years and we've not changed. So it's like, okay. One, and you call this an outcome report, and y'all know I'm an outcome freak. What is the outcome of the students that, or do we know they're twice as likely to need a graduation waiver, right? What's the outcomes for me are always what happens after graduation, right? So where do we know where those students end up? What happens to them after they, because I think that's an important question, right?
There's a NIDED survey that is a voluntary survey to find out what happens after engagement with the foster system and where are they now. It is completely voluntary. So the data that is within that is voluntary from the individuals who experience foster care. So we do have some data, but it's not 100% inclusive.
What's that data tell you?
Also, the IYI, the Indiana Youth Institute data book, did outline their outcomes once those foster youth that needed a graduation waiver did go to college. and they were more likely to have to retake courses and need extra support. And IY did a really good job of outlining that in their data book.
One thing I'm wondering, Byron, is on our Indiana GPS, you know how we have the advanced feature that allows consumers of the data to look at race and ethnicity, socioeconomic status, high ability, homelessness. I'm going to ask our team to look into foster youth. I don't think that's a tab right now, is it, Jason? Yeah, so that might be a tab that we need to elevate so that you can see throughout all of the indicators statewide, to your point, and then beyond that, we can see school by school so that we know, what schools are hosting the most foster students and how we can better support them. So that's something that we'll take on as an action item. That's a really good question. Thank you.
And another positive for outcome-focused folks is an amazing thing that DOE and DCS is doing that we have been highlighted by the United States Department of Education in their briefs because of our collaboration being so extensive as in comparison to those other states across the country. And we are in phase 2 of our bi-directional data share. And that data share is going to be a weekly live data share for all children that are in foster care, adjudicated CHINs out of home. These youth who are who fall under the definition of foster per the Every Student Succeeds Act is basically, I should restate that. But all of those children, we will be receiving live data on their educational progress, including any truancy attendance issues, grade issues, behavioral issues, discipline issues, those type of things, so that my team, the education consultants at DCS, can jump in and work with those children in a live, now, real-time situation so that we can actually impact those outcomes now rather than a year later. And then also Koyana and I are working to get a stronger understanding of this data and what can we do after analyzing this, after 5 years of it, what further information is this telling us and what trends are we noticing? And so we're working on that 5-year analysis right now. I'm sorry.
Can I ask one more?
Sure, Dr.
Please.
I think this is so important. But you mentioned at the beginning about the resources, because I wrote it down, the resources that are available, and you were trying to figure out how to use those or get to, I'm paraphrasing now, right? Mm-hmm. What are the obstacles there? Is there something that we as a board could help? I'm all about knocking down obstacles, right? Are there obstacles that are there, or you're just trying to figure out how to make them? Am I making sense with that question? Are those obstacles that are in front of you, or ones that you're trying to work through how to connect those dots, so to speak?
Yes, there are obstacles. There are obstacles with buy-in and understanding and engaging with trauma-informed educational strategies in this classroom setting. It's a whole pedagogy change. So as an educator, you have to change a lot about how you present your style, and really how you think, because you have to rephrase how you say things to be more sensitive in the trauma environment. That would be one of those barriers, is getting that buy-in, the exclusionary discipline, and the ability to utilize that subjectively. It's been a big challenge because children that are suffering from trauma have big behaviors. And they have really strong behaviors. And they'll say things that they've heard, but they don't really understand the impact of what they said. So, I'm gonna kill you. That might be a phrase they hear a lot in their home that just is a euphemism almost. Or, I'm going to kill you if you do that. But when they say it in school, it's taken as a real threat because of how the child said it, the tone, the situation. We don't know. And that's subjective because did the kid understand that that's what they threatened? Were they in an escalated state to where they didn't even really know what they said? Those are things, those are barriers. And then when you have a child that's in their trauma brain, they're not able to retain at that time because their trauma is stopping it from reaching the right portion of their brain to be able to process it to long term. So those are barriers. So I think that I know Representative Devon got a bill passed for pre-service educators to have trauma-informed training. That was a huge win. That was a couple years ago. So we're hoping to see a lot more of our new educators coming into the classroom with trauma-sensitive pedagogy and philosophies. And then on top of that, then we have the exclusionary discipline. And what are our alternatives to that? And that is not just for behaviors, but also for attendance. When children don't come to school and we suspend or expel them for not coming to school, we just gave them what they wanted. And that it just perpetuates the cycle and it perpetuates those gaps, and then we get outcomes like this. So I think those are also gaps of how can we work on this. And I know that Warren Township schools, James Taylor and Dr. Giannetti they were working on a wonderful program to try, with DOE, to try to address the truancy issues, specifically with our foster and our homeless populations. So those are some barriers. I know that we do have some really good programs, but I don't think that all the schools are on the same page. So maybe an idea would be like, have you ever heard of the echo trainings that the doctors use? Perhaps that's something that could be utilized for educators. I know that the feedback that we got from the Positive Discipline Guide, worked with Butler University and Brandy Oliver, were received so well from the educators in the field because of the type of resources and the way that they could utilize that. They could open it up and see in the moment, this is what's happening in the moment. Here's an idea that I can use right now. That's what educators need. We need quick right now. So more resources like that. So perhaps an echo training so that they could know what's happening in the other schools and what's going well, what's not, and how do they seek help. Maybe that's an idea.
Thank you.
I'm
Thank you
sorry.
very much.
I'm long-winded.
That's all right. I appreciate your time and your examples, and we appreciate you being here today. So thank you. Oh, question. Yes, go ahead.
Just real quick, I'm wondering what percentage of the Indiana foster youth may have an IEP, and if in fact they do, I'm wondering if the statistics could be improved if those IEPs are being followed. And that may be in here somewhere and I just missed it.
We do track it. It's on the full report. It's not on our slides. It is within the full report. And yes, we do have a team that works with and tries to fortify those IEPs and make sure that they are being followed. But my team is only 15. Talk to the governor if you'd like me to have more. No. But there's only 15 of us across the state, so we obviously can't get to all the IEPs for all the children that are in foster care. However, we do try. And there are some really well-written ones, and then there are some that aren't. So you're right. We could do better by improving those as well. And that would improve our outcomes.
Any other questions? Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, as someone who's in the classroom on a daily basis, and some of the examples you were giving, you could have been in my hallways talking about my students. I mean, I just felt like that is something that we are experiencing so much of, and as an older teacher who, when I went through all of my training, we didn't have these types of options available to us to learn. Like, I'm excited to go and research this and hopefully bring it back to my team, because we need these materials in our classroom now.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Well, your DCS Education Services team will provide free trauma-informed care trainings to your schools with credit CEUs. So we're happy to do that for you. That was just that. I didn't mean to plug, but
Yeah. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
All right, next we have the diploma landscape analysis. Assistant Secretary of Student Pathways and Opportunities, Jason Callahan, is going to kick it off by providing some background information, and then we'll have Jason introduce our partners from Insightful Ed Solutions to share a little bit more about what we've learned.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Dr. Jenner. Thank you, State Board. I know this is sort of the high school redesign kickoff, but we've obviously been working on this for several years, thinking about, as Dr. Jenner talked about, what is our profile of a learner or graduate in the Indiana GPS. That work has identified credentials, work-based learning, skills, all as outcomes that we want for our students. As we built the characteristics in the dashboard, and Mr. Sandlin is working on those aspirational indicators, we quickly realized we need to be able to define these things. And so Walton Family Foundation has come alongside the department to allow us to hire some consultants to have this conversation. And so today we have Insightful Education Solutions, Quentin Suffren and Danielle Mesera, and they're going to be presenting on the first piece of this, which is our landscape analysis. We always start with the why. We've had this conversation in the past, but really thinking about all those tensions that are taking place in our economy, and the downturn in post-secondary matriculation of our students, and as we have been pushing outcomes for students the Monday after graduation, there's this ongoing tension of what does success look like, and I think there's also a question of relevance. We talk about what is the workforce we're preparing our students for that Monday after, and AI automation is shifting that conversation a lot, and so it's also shifted from maybe that credential conversation a little bit more to the skill. What can humans do that AI or automation cannot do? And thinking about those human skills for human work. We also, and again, the Koyana's team, who just presented, also conducted a Gallup parent engagement poll last year. And in that, 76% of our Hoosier families said that their children were going to matriculate to college after the fall after graduation. And while we know from the data from the commission is only 53% matriculated to a campus the fall. So we're talking about this 23% drop between aspiration and attainment. And that's not even describing exactly how many students that are able to persist and complete post-secondary on time. I would also point out on this slide too the disparity of the diplomas earned and the outcomes based on those diplomas earned. We also know the economy. Again, educational attainment matters. 99% of new jobs created since the Great Recession go to Americans with some sort of education beyond high school. It matters to the economy. The good news to all this is that 64% of our students are leaving high school with some type of college credit. And so we also know that 5%, based on the credentials we have currently defined, those stackable, transferable credentials, only 5% are leaving with that. But again, we think there are a lot more behind the door. And if you're familiar with GPS, we have a graphic of that where these students are knocking on the door of credential completion. talked about knowledge and skills, communication, collaboration, work ethic are skills that we identified out of the 18 employability skills for the state of Indiana. We also recognize that as we elevate skills and credentials and work-based learning, we also have to continue to focus on those academic fundamentals and ensure that students have rigorous coursework, that all students do. And so how do we do both things, both and not an either or? These are the guiding principles we've used for GPS and we continue to use in this conversation, making sure that we're thinking about the learner first, learner-centered, future-focused systems. We have to be intentional. We recognize right away that if we're able to scale this in the state of Indiana, we have to have shared definitions of what we're talking about when we talk about credentials of value. What does that mean? High-quality work-based learning. What makes work-based learning high quality? How do we differentiate that? And then how do we scale that too? In this process, in this both and, how do we increase that diploma flexibility? Dr. Ernest, you mentioned about how do we remove those barriers in that last conversation. That's part of this conversation is what are those barriers facing our K-12 systems if we're going to scale this, and how do we remove that? How do we create that flexibility to ensure that we can provide greater access to work-based learning, credentials of value? And we've recognized from the beginning, Dr. Jenner says it all the time, blurring the lines between K-12, workforce, and higher ed. How do we do that? How do we build these strategic partnerships so that K-12 systems don't have to stand and do this alone? So today, Quentin and Danielle are going to present on the first piece of their work, this Indiana graduation landscape analysis. We are in the process of continuing to engage stakeholders along the way on what is the coursework necessary, the course sequencing leading to credentials of value, high quality work-based learning, and then ultimately, again, the diploma framework, and then what does implementation look like? With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Quentin and Danielle.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Quentin Soufren. I'm a principal with Insightful Ed Solutions. And it's my pleasure to be here and really walk you through at least the first part of our landscape analysis. The purpose of this analysis is there's a lot of work ahead. And that work needs to be informed by what's happened in the past. So I'm going to take you on a journey to the past somewhat today in terms of Indiana's graduation requirements, the efforts to ensure that students are college and career ready, and what that means in terms of the different eras of schooling, because it is changing. And so we want to look at how things have evolved over time. We did engage, and I say we, it was Dr. Jenner, Assistant Commissioner Callahan, Superintendent Callahan, really reaching out, talking to a lot of stakeholders, all the members of the board, but a range of other groups that represent stakeholders across the spectrum of education. And then finally, we want to talk a little bit about what's happening elsewhere. You know, where does Indiana sit when we think about where other states are moving in this space? So in terms of looking back, the evolution of graduation and diploma requirements really starts, we went back 4 decades, so into the 1980s. And I would say before we walk through just how things have changed, a couple of top-line themes emerged, and one of those is this is not just an evolution in requirements and tweaking of different, graduation diplomas and so forth. Some of that happens, but it's also an evolution away from course credits to experiences, competencies, mastery. It's also an evolution from focusing on classes, I would say, in cohorts, and really focusing or trying to focus more on individuals. And so as we walk through, I should say, these changes, I hope you'll keep that in mind, because taking us up to today, Indiana has been and is a leader in really thinking about how do we not just rethink high school, but how do we rethink the experiences of students so that the focus is not just on did we walk them across the stage, but as Jason pointed out, it has numbers of times, what happens after? And how well did we do our jobs in terms of making sure that they were prepared for life after high school? So starting in the 80s, admittedly where I graduated at the end of that era, very familiar for those of us who did, is you have, really a two-track system for diplomas. You have the academic, you have the general. And there are a lot of spaces in between. There was a lot of flexibility, 38 credits, number of credits, but if you look deeper into there, not very much math and science and in terms of requirements, and really the focus was more on graduation because the economy was different, expectations were different at the time. So this sort of kind of two-track academic general diploma structure spanned from the 1980s into about the mid-90s. And that's really when a shift started to happen and introduced what is still today the Core 40. Now, obviously those have been tweaked over time in terms of the courses and credits that make up that Core 40. But it really came together in 1994. You had business, industry, labor, higher ed, K-12 all coming together and saying, hey, we have these two diploma types, but frankly, neither one of them is really preparing students very well for life after high school. And this is, this was also a shift. We were about to enter a period where college going was really the priority. But even here, introducing that Core 40 was saying, if we have some sort of standard set of credits and courses, then we can be more assured that students are going to be prepared for post-secondary. And after that, really began a push to see more students earn that Core 40 diploma, so that there was the introduction of really 3 diploma types: the general, the academic honors, and the Core 40 diplomas. And I know it's hard to read on the screen for those who are behind me, but you can see over time, from the 90s to the early 2000s, that there is a shift. There were more students who were earning the Core 40 than earning the academic honors, but still the majority were in that kind of regular general diploma area. So progress over time, but still 3 types of diplomas, and still we would think about this today. Where are those folks, as you've noted, in terms of outcomes? And folks were not pleased with the outcomes. They felt like it wasn't moving fast enough. And it's still just kind of, when you think about who's going to earn the Core 40 or other things, then you're still talking about socioeconomic factors. You're talking about, who's at home, what kind of affluent situation would prepare a student more than someone who is historically disadvantaged. So in 2002, there was Indiana's Education Roundtable, which was chaired by the governor and the superintendent at the time, came together and wanted to put forward some plans. It took a couple of years to get their resolutions to the finish line, but this would really focus on how can we get more of our graduates graduating with that diploma that's going to hopefully most prepare them for life after high school, and in particular a post-secondary experience, because we are now entering this space where the 4-year degree is at a premium, and college going meant going to get that 4-year bachelor's. So when you shift to the graduation requirements in mid-late 2000s, it does reflect that shift, but it also shows that for students entering high school, they had more options. And so this was in 2006, and you had a math and science, career, post-secondary readiness options. You had the Core 40 being the default curriculum for college admissions. And then you had the introduction of technical honors. There is a recognition, because I will say there is a running theme, even going back as far as 1994, where industry is saying, hey, we need folks who are well educated, but we also need folks to show up to work and be ready to work. And those are not always the same things. So yes, literacy, yes, numeracy, but we need somebody who can succeed in a group setting or come to work and know how to behave in a workplace setting. So the Core 40 has become really the priority of graduation requirements by the mid to late 2000s. And there was the introduction of the I-STEP, which was, how do we ensure on top of that, that there is some sort of guarantee exam or some way that we can have an earlier indicator of folks who are on track to meet that. Not just around credits, but showing whether or not they were proficient in that. That had both good and bad outcomes in some ways, depending on how it was implemented. At the same time, there is still some disparities between how well students are doing based on their diplomas. And so the way to read this particular chart is, each of the years, this comes from the Commission's report card, which they started way back in the day. But you can see at the top, those are the total number of students who are entering in each of those years that didn't require remediation. So you can see it fluctuates. Those are not bad numbers if you look back in time and think about that. But when you look at the other three rows, they're not supposed to add up, by the way, just so you know. What it's saying is that underneath the hood, you're lifting that up. When you disaggregate by diploma type, you can see the percent of students who have earned a general diploma who needed remediation. And so that's telling you a couple of things. Like in 2013, 2/3 of students who graduated with a general diploma needed remediation. 1/3 of students who were graduating with a Core 40 diploma needed remediation. Now, obviously, general diploma students already are going to be at a disadvantage because they're not meeting admission requirements and probably having to take those. They're probably enrolling in a lower number too. So the higher the number of those folks, more folks were graduating and enrolling who had a Core 40 or honors as opposed to general diploma. So bottom line, there was still dissatisfaction in terms of how well these diploma tracks were working and really preparing folks for what was next. And so graduation requirements, there was an increased understanding that improvement was necessary, but that, again, employers coming into the mix and saying, hello, it's not just these skills, they're not translating. And this is also a time when students were surveyed and they were starting to have regret. Folks who were entering college and saying, if I could do it again, I'd change my major. Or I'm not feeling the connection between what I've just earned in a degree and how well I am positioned to actually get an employment. And as someone who has a psychology degree, I totally agree with them because you were told to go out, get a degree, and everything was going to be smooth after that. And that's not always the case. So 2 introductions of changes. One was the college and career readiness standards. Indiana was one of the first to really roll these out that looked at a more holistic view of what the standards-based movement should consider when they are teaching in the classroom and ensuring that students are equipped with certain skills. And it also created more options for how students can demonstrate these different academic and technical skills. So it created a CTE course adoption that could count for this. It talked about other exams. And it also required a CTE subcommittee to examine potential changes to the diploma. So this actually then came up with, this diploma subcommittee came up with some proposed recommendations. They were not adopted by the state board at the time, but they were a move from the current diplomas to those kind of 4 different diplomas that most of them are Core 40 oriented, to some proposed diplomas around workforce ready, college career ready, and college career ready with honors. Even though they were not adopted, they set the stage for additional legislation. And because there was a lot of discussion at this time about, are we really just creating something new, or is this just another shade of what we had? And so out of that, in 2017 and 18, now we're getting closer to where we are now when we think about the cohorts of students that are going to be graduating. It added the notion of this evolution of just a diploma to a pathway, really thinking about this more holistically and more broadly around kind of the set of experiences. And it's not just about achieving the checklist of course credits. Now, implementation-wise, those sorts of things, we can have that debate whether we're there yet. But bottom line is it does recognize that it's a broader set of skills and experiences that are needed. And it required the state board to develop those graduation pathways. It also consolidated the 4 diplomas to 1 diploma with designation. And this gets to that theme of personalization or individualizing the diploma. So instead of saying there's just a set of criteria that you have to meet for each one, it's saying now you have more options within the diploma, one diploma, to actually demonstrate, show, or pursue specific interests or pathways or courses throughout that moment. And it allowed the State Board to also consider some options for Algebra 2 that might be equivalent for that. And so obviously this requires less jogging of your memory at this point, because in 2017-18, the State Board convened the Graduation Pathways Panel to put forward those recommendations. And, you know, there was a broader engagement and awareness around the notion of careers and where career interests lie, that you're not just preparing students to graduate, that there's something afterwards that we need to be thinking about. And college going, you know, at this point in time, we're starting to see a lot of people have buyer's remorse from college and post-secondary. Not saying that they should, but because of the pathways or because of where they were directed or focused, it wasn't necessarily paying or having the return on investment that a lot of folks wanted from it. And there's a strong foundation of academic and technical skills, but also this notion of we need to demonstrate, not just have standards for college and career readiness, but really demonstrate employability skills. And so obviously this is where we are today. There are 3 requirements within these graduation pathways: the diploma, plus learning and demonstrating employability skills, post-secondary readiness competencies, and there are a range of ways that students can meet each of these pathway requirements. At the same time, obviously coming out of a huge disruption from the COVID-19 pandemic, folks were really thinking about what they wanted from school, what they wanted for students, and Indiana had been thinking about this for a while in terms of trying to think about how do we innovate, not just what we're reporting on in terms of accountability, in terms of what we are signaling is important, but then how do we innovate this notion of wrapping our arms around an individual and what we want them to have in order to be ready. And so obviously I don't need to say much about the GPS, but it really focused on those 5 key characteristics that, again, if we're thinking about that evolution, it's not just courses and credits anymore. We're talking about different experiences, different ways to demonstrate skills, competencies, and so forth. And so Indiana's on the cusp of innovating in this space, and with this legislation that it just passed, I think has given everyone the ability to think about that and really move forward in this space. And so that leaves us, obviously, with an opportunity, and we will say that Indiana has been and is a leader in this space, but this is a huge opportunity because despite a very, very strong evolution in kind of thinking about students differently, high school hasn't changed all that much over the years. 4 decades is a long time. And so while it might feel that there's a lot happening, and there's a lot happening over the past few years, the same voices of employers, the same voices of community members are saying again and again, we need this to be something a little bit different. We need to really focus on, you know, making sure that students aren't just academically prepared, that's critical, but that have these other characteristics so that we can be sure that they are ready for a successful life that can ensure that they are economically secure. So with that, I will thank you for the trip down memory lane and pass it on to Danielle.
Good morning, I'm Danielle Messer, and also serve as a principal consultant for Insightful Ed Solutions. And so as Quentin just mentioned, obviously he walked us back and allowed us to get to where we are today. And so my job is really to talk about the fact that here we are today and have a glimpse as to the work ahead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on 2 things. One, I'm going to kind of share at a very high level some of the feedback that we've been hearing. And then second, I'm going to share some of the initial assessing that we have done with other states around the areas that are important and what is being focused with Indiana itself. Once I conclude that, Jason will come back up and really talk in a little bit more detail about what does that work really mean in the next few months.
Hey, Danielle, if you could speak up just a little
Yep.
bit, it could be me, but I find myself, I'm leaning in.
I know, I'm trying to be really soft with my voice. I'm
I think
being
it's
too
because
soft.
I'm so loud that it just doesn't, but yeah, if you just a little
Absolutely.
bit, that'd be helpful.
So as mentioned, two things that we have tried to do in informing the conversation is, one, have a variety of conversations with a variety of different stakeholders, including members of the board here today. You can see on the slide here the other groups that we have been working to have conversations on. This includes everyone from parents to advocacy groups, business and industry, community organizations, as well as educators, also our post-secondary systems. And all of that is intended to really hit on what are we hearing from folks. So the next few slides are really about the major themes that we are picking up from stakeholders. There should be nothing on these slides that should be a surprise to you. I think that it's very reflective of the conversation that across the state folks are having, whether you're in education, industry, or otherwise. But we did want to make sure that we call out these key themes, and we do believe that they will play a continued role in a threading through the work ahead. So first off, how do we make sure that the high school experience is much more learner-centric and more relevant? And relevancy takes on a variety of different layers. It's relevant to the person at the time that they're experiencing that instructional practice, but also what does that mean to them in their late day-to-day lives? And what would that mean to them post-high school when they leave us and continue on with their experiences? So how do we make it more learner-centric and relevant? Coupling that is, how do we think through more personalized pathways and experiences, and when are those most appropriate for the students? When are those most appropriate for the students? Are they in the upper grades? By and large, major themes from that is yes. If we move our students through 9 and 10, can we give allowances for them in 11th and 12th to have that more personalized focus, more personalized learning, and definitely those experiences that are relevant to them as they are thinking through, what is it that I want to be doing with my life? How is it that I need to be doing that? And what do I need to do? What do I need to take? What do I need to accomplish to make that happen? And that really kind of brings in what we would consider, what we call, Quentin and I, really that diploma plus approach. In other words, if I meet my requirements for graduation, what are the other elements that are important to me to have that more holistic learning experience? And so we think about that as well, and that was a very strong thread through the conversations, is it's not just enough to simply check the boxes that that student has met the requirements, but what else do they need to do?
Can I pause you there?
Yeah.
So I was on many of the stakeholder calls, and if I wasn't on, Jason was on as part of our team. And that one was really interesting because people like the concept of keeping graduation pathways as the foundation. Obviously, that component one with the coursework we need to work on, the flexibility and really being intentional, especially since it hasn't changed for 30 plus
40,
years,
yeah.
40 years. But the other piece that was really interesting is parents of all types, like honors parents to parents of special needs students, to really talked a lot about access for their kids that have experiences in work-based learning and in these credentials of value. So a common theme that kept like bubbling to the top, and whether we call it this or not, but was some sort of like, if grad pathways is the foundation, how could we make a diploma plus that is really opens the door for us not to be obsessed with coursework, but to really elevate the value of experiences and readiness.
Yeah.
So more on that discussion, I'm sure, but I wanted to, that was a common theme over and over.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, there should be nothing surprising in some of these pullouts that we have on these slides, because exactly that is that time and time again, it didn't matter the group, that the conversation really centered around, yes, we understand the importance of core academics, but, and it was always that but that allowed for these more purposeful engagements, whether it's competency-related engagements, whether it's other types of learner-centric engagements, that allowed for, again, this more holistic experience for the student beyond just simply sitting in a classroom and digesting what is presented to them by that teacher in the front. And so this is the issues of that more learner-centric, the skills, the competencies. And then how do we then personalize to a point that recognizes that we are not widgets. We are not all cut the same cloth. Students have different interests and different areas of focus. And so that does play into a broader consideration of equivalencies. If you have math, if you have English, science, and others that are required, must all students take the same courses in order to meet those requirements? And that's where that last bullet comes in. Is there other ways in which we can be thinking about hitting those marks, but recognizing, again, that we are not all cut from the same cloth? We're not widgets that simply need to be fit into holes. So when we continue on this, again, just reiterating the importance of experiential learning, work-based learning. But this other piece is critically important, and this gets back to some of the points that Quentin already made as well, is our ability. It's not enough to say, let's go in this direction, but as a state, do we have the ability then to track these? And I use tracking in a very good way here. It's just like, if we're in these areas, how do we know, one, that they're having these experiences, and two, how do we know that they're good, high quality, and relevant? And that issue came up time and time again, is do we have the systems where to actually follow these experiences along the way? And that's going to be a critical piece as we look forward also to the work ahead. The other piece too, which I think is really important, and I'm glad that this came up in feedback, is can we take certain foundational elements, certain awareness, career awareness as well, and allow for them to bleed down into the middle school years? If you can do that, then it frees up the ability at the high school level to go after those more personalized pathways, particularly at those upper level grades 11 and 12. Along the line also is, again, we've already kind of touched on this, is rebranding that diploma so that it's not just simply diploma for diploma's sake, but it actually captures the learning, the accomplishments, the achievements of that person, and that carries currency with that individual when they leave high school and, again, go on to their next chapters in life.
So pausing there, a lot of conversation for the board to be aware of about, students and parents alike saying, after high school, if I go to college, my college asks for the transcript, but the employer doesn't. The employer doesn't. So if I'm going into employment or enlistment, and so it says learner profile, that could be called whatever you want, but it also is a conversation about what is the value of the current transcript in Indiana, in our country. And does Indiana have an opportunity to really lead on, well, it's coursework, but it's also skill mastery. Yeah. It's also work-based learning experiences. So I think that the redesign of diplomas opens the door for us to do a lot more redesigning on some other bureaucratic elements that have been there for decades.
Yeah, yeah. And go ahead.
Yes, sir.
And I had this down for later because I know I'm sure there'll be some discussion time, but I think if you remember, that was an area I was super passionate about on our call, because I think one question that at some point we've got to answer is, what should a high school diploma or transcript represent, right? Mm-hmm. Now, you know, on my call, I said I just ought to do away with diplomas as we know them. I don't think the world's ready for that yet, so not one to set anybody's hair on fire yet. But I think we have to answer that question, right? What does that represent?
Yeah.
Because and Jason, I love that you said we're beyond the days of I've handed you your diploma, we're done. And that's been said in some of these meetings, right? And it appalls me when I hear that. We have to care what happens after we've handed whatever it is we're going to hand them, right? And now it's probably just going to be an app, but whatever. So sorry, I just had to.
As Byron has just shaped the whole media story for the for the public.
Well, I just think if we're gonna redesign, we gotta think beyond where we are right now.
We do,
right? I mean, we have to. So.
Absolutely, and what goes hand in glove with that is then the ability for the state to ensure that what is happening is relevant and actually of high value. In other words, not just saying go forth and be who you are, but rather if we allow for you to have a more learner-centric, personalized experience, we have to make sure that it is high quality, that it's relevant, and that it has currency outside of K-12, which means currency with post-secondary, currency with employers, currency with communities, so that that person does, with truth be told, have the skills that we believe allow for them to be ready for those next chapters. You're absolutely correct. Coupled with that is ensuring, though, that our educators, our teachers, our support staff are also in a position of strength. That if we go in these areas, those individuals have to be confident and comfortable with what we're asking of them and in what they're doing and what they're exchanging with students and other stakeholders along the way. And then the last thing I would just say, and this is very complimentary to it, is just the ensuring that we are evaluating and aligning our policies and supports to make this happen. I know that sounds like a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised at how often that is not thought about until the 11th hour. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, how do we pigeonhole this? Or how do we get this square peg through that round hole? So it's important to keep these things in mind. As I mentioned at the beginning, in addition to seeking out the stakeholder feedback, we've done an initial scan of states and just looking at what other states are doing in these areas and what really Indiana is focusing on. And so we looked at it from 3 different lenses. One, kind of going back to that diploma plus concept, is what are states doing, if there are states out there, who are looking at this also. Like, not only are you hitting the requirements for your graduation, but what are those credit and non-credit experiences that are valued, that are being identified and said, we want you to be having these things as well as part of our ability to assess your readiness. The second one is just around that personalization and flexibility. If we want to have that more learner-centric experience, then we have to make sure that the constructs and the infrastructure is set up to allow for the students to do that, but also to ensure, going back to that piece, of rigor, relevance, high quality, right? So it's not just simply go forth and do as you wish, but how do we know that those experiences align with what the interests are and they're of high quality and match to the expectations that the state has for the students. And then lastly, this issue of career readiness. And what does that mean? It gets back to this experiential learnings, whether it's formalized work-based learning on the continuum of experiences or some other type, service learning. There might be some other experiences and ways in which students can demonstrate and show mastery. It can be in those areas of employability-related skills that have ties into work-based learning, but you have those experiences also on a daily basis happening in classrooms. When we talk about communications, teamwork, critical thinking, these are all critical skills that we want to make sure that our students are able to demonstrate to show mastery. I will say this, that in the initial scan of our states, we've not found a state that has been as comprehensive in its thinking as Indiana has. Now, that doesn't mean Indiana is going to knock the ball out of the park, but what it does say...
We are.
I know, but what it does say, say is that it gives you the opportunity to hit that ball out of the park. Indiana is taking on quite an amazing approach, and it's important to keep that in mind, that Indiana has always served as a trailblazer in quite a number of areas. This is one of these monumental, kind of earth-shattering moments where if Indiana can be successful, which we know it will be, it also will serve as a kind of North Star and a vanguard for other states to be thinking about this as well. So as I go through these states, bear that in mind, that these are promising practices from other states. They're reflective of one or more of these areas, but there is no state at this point in time in our initial studies that have shown it hitting all.
Before we move on, I'm
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. I'm trying to wait for like the right moment.
Oh, go ahead.
What you just said really resonated, and just pulling back to slide 28, the last bullet that you had there, I think your point of the vision is comprehensive, is leading the way in many regards. I think would love to encourage us to be thinking about implementation and execution in parallel, because I think that's hard. And that will be the lid or the limiter for how effective this can be. Right. And so I think it would be, I fear it may be a fatal error if we're not doing both of those at the same time, because of the pace at which those things would need to move. And my hunch is that success is going to be yoked directly to blended funding and integrating and knitting of existing funding streams, and that's going to take some time to sort out and rewire. So it may be, anyway, as we kick off, like, starting to do this, I would just encourage a parallel implementation team, starting to think about what it would mean to do these things.
So and just to point out what Katie Mode is mentioning, the bullet that says on the stakeholder feedback, evaluate and align existing policies and supports to help schools transition to a more learner-centric approach. I think that's what you observed over the past 40 years in Indiana. We've wanted something different. Our employers have wanted something different. Our communities have, but yet we're caught in doing the same thing. Sounds like just like every other state. And so what I wrote down as you were talking, it's kind of interesting, and you have to give praise where praise is due, but on multiple of these stakeholder feedback loops, we had bills that passed our General Assembly that allows us the flexibility to do it.
That's right.
Right? So you have House Bill 1002, which I think has been tough for the general public to wrap their arms around. There are so many elements of really good opportunity within that we must seize in order to hit the ball out of the park. Additionally, House Bill 1001, which is our state's budget bill, this has not hit the news as much as it should and it will. We're gonna share it out, but within the tuition support formula, for the first time ever, you have incentivized credentials of value in the CTE space. You have incentivized Indiana College Core, an associate degree, and so that, and work-based learning incentivized. So that right there starts the movement. If we incentivize right directionally and support schools in moving that direction, and then of course we'll move this through this process, and then we'll go to the school performance process to really line it up. So I'm glad you pointed that out, Katie, and I just wanted to call out that our General Assembly has set us up nicely to be able to drive through some of these barriers, but we're going to have to be bold, and we're going to have to be willing as a state to lead, because as you're going to see from some of Danielle's examples, we're going to need to move faster than some of what we're going to see.
Yeah,
So,
and absolutely, and I think these are important considerations. Is that going back to this, where we've been in the last 40 years, it isn't that Indiana hasn't tried to kind of reach out. But what ended up happening is it always came back to center, right? You would do some nips and tucks here and there, but not anything really that rocked the boat in a good way, right? And back to your point, Katie, is that it is about ensuring that if we go in this direction, then the constructs, essentially the guardrails, the sandbox that we're in, is such that it's built to support, to ensure success. And so you have to have that. You're absolutely right. Those should be very complementary to one another. And it goes back to one of the other feedback points that came in, which was the issue of data, right? Is that if we do this, how do we know? Is our system such that it will allow for us to really look at a profile of a student and know with confidence that that student actually is ready? Because we have helped to define what readiness means, what does proficiency mean, and then have we been able to follow that student as they had those experiences, they had those achievements, and they've earned those credentials. So again, kind of keeping all of that in mind. And so when we look at their different states, we looked at them from those three buckets. So we looked at, that diploma plus approach, like what are some other states looking at? And so we'll start here with this one, and then we'll work our way into the other two. So there are two states that we're going to look at here, Idaho and Ohio. And in both of these cases, these states have looked past just simply that credit attainment. So in Idaho, they have 46 credits based on courses, but the things that I want to focus on here is that they also have a proficiency requirement, civics and government proficiency. Now in this case, it's the requirement that the students pass the U.S. citizenship test. They can start as early as grade 7, and they can take it as much and as often as they need to in order to pass. Now, that may not be the best example, but what it is trying to say, and what Idaho is attempting to say, is there are other ways in which we need to be thinking through proficiencies. How do we measure those? And in this case, one of them was around the civics and government proficiency. The other one is completing a senior project. That senior project is not too dissimilar to what we would think about as a senior project, except it does allow for the project to be multiple years. So if a student wishes to start in an earlier grade, they can culminate over those years to the completion that senior year. And it also can be group and individual. So it allows for some kind of, leeway in how we think through. Research-based, and they have to also present and have the accompanying kind of documentation to show that they completed that project in a manner.
Just a quick point of clarification to make sure the board is aware. Indiana is seen as a leader in the civics space in particular. Some states don't even require U.S. government to graduate, right? So we have U.S. government as a requirement. We also have the new civics course that is going to be a requirement for all Indiana sixth graders. It's a one-semester course that starts this year. Additionally, all students, and the data is required to be reported to the department, all students, seniors are required to take a portion of the naturalization exam. So we do have that level of data. I just wanted to point that out.
The other state that we want to hit on here around beyond the traditional diploma is Ohio, a neighbor state. Here they have, after the obtaining of the 20 credits, and we put in a couple of places the equivalents for that. So 20 credits in Ohio is that 1 credit to the 2 credit equivalents that Indiana. So kind of keep that in mind when we think about just the credit numberings. But the more important things that we want to really hit on here is for Ohio, they also require meeting a competency score, either for algebra and English, but they also allow for alternative competencies. And that can be ACT, SAT, military, career experience, but they have other options available also in terms of hitting the competency score. The last thing that I flag here is that in Ohio, they also require that students earn at least 2 diploma seals. And these diploma seals, there's 12 of them altogether that Ohio recognizes and promotes. So the students can earn seals anything as broadly as academics, arts, career-related, military, the sciences, etc. So it really is allowing for then that personalization, that learner-centric interest area. But they require that the students hit at least 2 of those seals. Those seals are affixed to the high school diploma. And so that carries with them. So when they do leave, they have those additional seals, that complementary nature to say, yes, I not only earned my high school diploma, but I have these other areas of strength that I also have achieved.
Are the Ohio seals more sector-based, like you described, more content area sector versus what we heard from stakeholder calls, which is more skill-based?
Yeah. These are more so they're more sector-based skills within those. So in other words, if it's a fine arts seal, then obviously there are expectations that that student has hit either learning or experiences that would reflect that they have shown some level of competency in fine arts. The same would be in the sciences, same would be with CTE.
Great, thanks.
So moving on to the second bucket, which was really that personalization piece of it, we locked in on Arizona and Florida as the 2 states that we'll share today. Now, certainly there are other states that have delved in this area, but we'll just hit these 2 states. So in Arizona, 2 things that we really want to call out is the ability on the part of the student to have other types of coursework that hits the equivalent requirements for that student. So in this case, in addition to taking the Algebra 2 credit, they've allowed for comparable and equivalent courses that the student can take. If they pass those, then obviously they've also then hit the requirements for the Algebra 2. That carries over in particular to career and technical education, where a number of completers can also, depending on the coursework that they take, the program of study that they're in, could hit credits towards the English, the math, the science, economics, and et cetera. So they are allowing for, again, a wider kind of pool of opportunity for these students. So if they wish to, they don't necessarily have to take the traditional core academics. They can take courses that meet that equivalent.
Danielle,
yes,
just
ma'am.
to clarify, you still have to, there isn't any option for Algebra 1. Like you still
correct. You still have to take Algebra 1. It doesn't, the kind of allowing for personalization is Algebra 2 on.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So for Florida here, there are 2 things that we really wanted to hit on. First was the ability for a student not only to hit that standard diploma, but also to the requirement that they hit one of 5 diploma options pathways. So they hit the core requirements for graduation, but the student has to also hit requirements of one of the 5 options that are available to him. Those options include what they call academics challenging, which would just mean obviously advanced academics courses. It could be career and technical education. It could be international baccalaureate, but in all cases, what it is just allowing for the student to not only meet those requirements, but what are the other areas of specialization that they want to have students hit. The last one is just, again, very similar to some of the other states that we've already highlighted, the ability for the student to have multiple options to satisfy requirements. So again, getting back to the area of personalization, just like with Arizona, what are other courses that can have equivalency that they can hit that meet the requirements that the state has set? And then the last one that we want to hit on, this last bucket and last state, is from Oregon, and this is around increasing career readiness. And I must say that in Oregon, this example is actually quite an interesting and robust approach to this. So in addition to obviously meeting the credit requirements as part of the graduation, they also have to demonstrate essential skills proficiency, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And in addition to hitting the demonstration of essential skills, they also have to complete one of the 3 options for personalized learning. So again, really one, strengthening that issue of personalization, but also the expectation that the student can demonstrate a skills set. Now, essential skills, this is a cross-disciplinary approach. It is and includes a lot of what we would consider as part of employability-related skills: reading comprehension, math, applied math, communications, technology, global literacy, team management, being able to personally manage your own time. So this is a set of skills that is passed in part of the statute in Oregon. Now, it's important, there's an asterisk there, and if you receive the notes, we'll have a little bit more information. Oregon has put a pause on the implementation and the movement on this, largely because they're still kind of making sure that the refinements associated with how do we kind of check, how do we kind of calculate what proficiency means, what does that look like, particularly this is a cross approach effort, a cross-disciplinary approach effort. What does that mean? Who's responsible, or how many people are responsible? So if we talk about reading comprehension, who all is involved to making sure that that is one that's been hit and proficient? So just kind of put that as a footnote, but that is something that Oregon is continuing to focus on.
So they are in development. Have they had a year of implementation at scale?
Not really.
Okay.
They are in that realm. Now, do they have statewide and multiple statewide information on this? No.
Okay.
So they might be just a little bit ahead in terms of thinking through what this looks like and how can it look like, particularly when you're talking about a community of educators across disciplines who might be involved, or outside of education, if you engage the employer or other businesses. Again, what does that look like? How is that captured? How is that assessed in a good way to ensure that there's a level of competency and proficiency?
So is it developed so that essential skills could be affirmed in a work-based learning setting?
Absolutely. Work-based learning is one of those options as well.
Okay.
But again, it gets back to what is that experience? Is it high quality? Does it match to the relevancy that you're expecting?
Right.
And are they given within that setting the experiences that allow for them to demonstrate mastery, right? So that is communications. It might be they do presentations. It might be they are in teams with employers or employees, in addition to peer groups, to again reflect that they've mastered those skills. And then the last piece again here is around personalized learning. The one that I think the first 2 are pretty self-explanatory. You can imagine those. That's the student plan. The other one is career-related learning experiences. That can be everything from an internship, pre-apprenticeship, apprenticeship, but it has to be a structured experience. It has to be one that has been signed off and identified by the state as that experience. The last one is the extended application, which is a very interesting one. And this is where the student essentially, it's credit, non-credit requirement, but essentially it's almost like blending those first 2 together. It's taking what the student has identified as their plan, their steps, their path that they're taking, and then taking into that the experiences, the experiential learning that's taking place, and allowing for that to then play itself out. And they are to help to kind of match, then if we take all of this together, then what does my extended learning look like, and how do I apply that? So that's kind of how they came up with the term extended application. It's really taking both of those and then kind of putting that forward. The student is the driver on that. Obviously, they receive advising in that regard, but the student is the driver. They have to do the homework, they have to do the research, and they have to affirm that they are where they need to be and that it's relevant and aligned. All right, so that is for me. Let me go ahead and turn this back over to you, Jason.
Thank you, Quentin, Danielle. I just want to wrap this up again. As I said at the beginning, this is kind of the kickoff for the state board and publicly, but we've been doing this since the beginning, and really the conversation around GPS and those indicators. Dr. Ernest, you talked about the Monday after graduation, and I'll tell you, when we released GPS and the indicators and people started seeing college and career credentials and some of those indicators that are the Monday after, they were starting to think about that a little deeper. So we have some data systems that we're building out. And then Mrs. Moe, you talked about that parallel implementation plan. You know, we've been working on the 3E grant. We have 150 grantees in the 3E and the employability skills. I think last board meeting we had Batesville and Milan present. We have a lot more that are, in fact, yesterday I was with Mrs. Rentschler and Mr. Gastineau's school leadership about academy models through the 3E grant. And so there's just a lot of work that is happening right now, and that I would say is somewhat of that implementation. And now that we have people coming alongside Danielle and Quentin that are really doing some of that consulting work to be able to say, these are the things, we can start corralling and bringing all that work together finally. So these are the areas, regardless of those grants, the outcomes should be increasing high quality work-based learning and access, obviously, and then what are those credentials of values? And then thinking about those diploma requirements and how can we create flexibility so that it's not one more thing, but it is the thing that we're doing in the state of Indiana. So our timeline as we move forward, presented this at the beginning, so this is our first public presentation, and then we're going to continue to work on these deliverables. That's it. Dr. Jenner?
Yeah, thank you, Jason. And just to give the board and general public an idea of the pace to which we'll move ahead. Refinement of courses in sequence, process for determining credentials of value, definition and framework for quality work-based learning. All of that is within House Bill 1002 and 1001. So as a board, we want to do that, and the General Assembly has again given us that flexibility and that go to move. We'll be interacting with a lot of different stakeholders to build this out, but our big goal is that prior to the 2024 legislative session, we'll be ready to go with our recommendations to the General Assembly, because high school diplomas are in like 100 different provisions within statute. And we as a State Board of Ed cannot rule make before the statute is updated. So we've been in contact with leadership of both chambers, and so we will seek to move our process, probably open rule make, give the recommendations to the General Assembly. Once they sine die next year, then we as a board will be ready to affirm that, so that schools may opt in for the 24-25 school year. That is a very, 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 very expedited pace, but we know that we can do it. And again, we have alignment and a lot of people ready to move forward with this. So at the June, before I go to the June meeting, I'd love to just open it up. If there are any thoughts, whether in the room or Scott and Erica online, if there are any thoughts from the board. Yes, Iris.
I think one thing that is glaringly obvious to me is like the mindset shift and the culture shift that this will create in the education industry in our state. And what I always think about then is how are we preparing teachers and pre-service teachers? And so are there any levers that we can pull with teacher prep programs? You know, it's cute when I hear, oh, we've had a unit on project-based learning in our teacher prep program. It's like, it's not a unit, it's a shift. It's kind of like a lifestyle shift, a mindset shift. And so how do we do that in tandem with all of this? Because the laws have to change, this work has to change, but we can't have these things change and then not have people in the buildings that know how to implement and do this change.
100% agree. Within House Bill 1002, there is a measure that charges us to build out teacher preparation and working with industry and higher ed partners, as well as there is a budget line for that. So that will be part of the design process and is totally key. Like with anything, though, like with any change, we're going to have some people who are high flyers who are ready to go tomorrow. In fact, I have a list of them that someone recently gave me in the office and working with the Principals Association and Superintendents Association. They have a list of those who are ready to go. And then we'll have some who need extra support.
Yep.
And we know that. We know that it's going to be in levels and in scaling this well. So great point. Thank you for bringing that up.
The other thing that's on my mind, and this may be misplaced because I can't speak to the legislation in the level of detail you can, Katie, but I'm thinking too, so I hear us pushing on, we have 9-10 to build a foundation, and then we're really open to what could 11-12 look like for this customization. And it seems like a lot of the other funding mechanisms, like I think about WIOA, it's focused on the chronological age of a person. So really focused on your 18, so you're legally entitled to work. So now you can pull down these fundings, and I think this is what I'm thinking about. We have money that resides in different pots with very arbitrary 40-year-old levers to access. What we're doing, I think we might leave money on the table if we're only thinking about what's available in certain buckets. And also, again, like these are questions I recognize we're not necessarily here to solve, but if we're moving in this way with what it means to access certain types of career readiness education, why does that gate to entry have to be 18? Right? This is so these are these different funding areas that are locked with old mechanisms that may be a barrier unless we can start to move those in parallel and access this money so that we can make sure that students have the benefit of all of the various funding streams to help them get to where they want to go. And we don't have certain money walled off behind sort of other funding mechanisms that were designed at a different point in time that are outdated.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It does. And it's interesting that you brought up WIOA, which is obviously a lot of federal bureaucratic pieces there. Just a little bit of a more of a glimpse into 1001 and 1002. In both of those, there are what is called a CSA, career scholarship account, which would open up to $5,000 per year for students to get this knowledge and skills. And that opens up 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade. What's interesting in my mind, what you just pointed out, is when you think about competency mastery, even looking around at this table, depending on the competency, Irish, you might have mastered at age 12. It may be, for me, age 15. It may be, right? It's going to be the same with every child we're working with. And so that could be, as we get in here and build this out and have our schools, work with our schools, we're going to learn some things. And so that could be something that we come back to our General Assembly as a recommendation, rather than having a set grade level or a set age to allow that flexibility. It's an interesting idea. Yes, Dr. Ernest, and then William.
So to that point, because I had a couple of points that I just want to make sure that we don't forget about, is one, is for us to think about competency-based as we work through this, right?
Yeah.
What would that look like if we were in that type of a model, which I certainly would advocate for. But then also, I think we need to consider, because in this report it talked about math classes being applied. Why in the world do we not make every class applied? I've never understood that, right? Thanks, Katie, for nodding your head on that. So I want us to think about that too, right? How do we get to a world which then takes us to the other piece? And you know this, Katie, I'm not a big fan of credits at this point either. Why aren't we looking at transferable skills? And so how could we build that into this system as we look at it, those transferable skills, which then to me make some of the things that other states are doing much easier as to what English are we teaching in CTE and those kinds of things. It makes which is my last point, it makes the flexibility much more understandable. And Jason, I loved we're usually on the same page. When you talked about flexibility's almost become a cliche. Because when we say flexibility to schools, they're having real trouble with understanding what is that flexibility?
Sure.
How do I get that flexibility? What's that look? So how do we make it? I'm going to use a metaphor here. I have a tractor at home that has front wheel assist, so it's 4-wheel drive. When I turn sharp, it automatically flexes and turns that off so that it's not trying to pull right. So how do we make the flexibility almost automatic, right? That if this child, if Greg needs this, it automatically happens, right? If Kristen needs this, and I know that's very Pollyannic, right? I get it. But I think that's a way we need to figure out I think the flexibility is almost just is hard for people, right? It'd be like me trying to do yoga, right? It's just hard for that. Don't imagine that out there in the public. There's some more media coverage, right? Byron doing yoga. And then lastly, I think, let's not forget, the teacher in me wants to go back to the end in mind. And I want to make sure that we think about what do we want. I'm making this point again. What should that graduate really look like? What should that diploma, transcript, whatever the heck we want to call it, the Indiana app that a student can give to their people, what's that look like? Because I think in February, All for Ed put out a report on under measuring the career. We had a whole session on that out at the legislative conference for NASB. And it talked about we're underestimating what those career particularly are, and I think we need to think about that end in mind. And not to say that you're not, but I think that still to me is an intro discussion, right? What do we really want there to be when we're done, right?
And that almost goes back to even our early work of the Indiana graduate profile. Our
Absolutely.
end point is Indiana graduates prepared to succeed. Hoosier spoke loud and clear about those 5 characteristic areas that we affirmed. Now, how do we make sure that we make it happen? So we'll go to Mr. Durham, and then Mr. Bass has his hand up.
Just as we are reimagining and rethinking high school and diplomas and things of that nature, I couldn't get past one of the bullet points that says that we need to make the high school experience more learner-centric and relevant. As we're talking about stakeholders. So just a question or a thought, and I'm wondering, as we are looking to make the high school experience more learner-centric and relevant, have we asked students?
Yes.
Just a question.
Yeah.
To the student, what will make your high school experience more learner-centric and relevant? So I think we need to get some input from the students on that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have asked students, and we need to continue to ask students throughout this entire process. Really important point. Thank you. Mr. Bass?
Yeah, so first, thanks to obviously leadership within the department and then consultants for doing the work and leaning in on that. It's funny, on one of the slides I mentioned the Carnegie unit, and I happened to be a couple weeks ago out at a summit with the Carnegie Foundation, which created the Carnegie Unit, and their number one priority now as a organization is to do away with the Carnegie Unit, both in K-12 and in higher ed, because they've essentially come to say that's actually harming student progress and what we need. And so that's an interesting national picture to some of this, is that there's a movement, and Carnegie Foundation isn't alone in this. There's obviously multiple others, but I think we're starting to see this groundswell across the country. One thing I wanted to note, so we're getting, with my Purdue Polytechnic hat on, we're going to launch a micro school this fall, and completely immersive, project-based, right, competency-based. The challenge we have, though, is because of the diploma requirements, and essentially at the end of the year, you've got to turn in, it's the end of the year, so you're done, and then you're going to start over the next year. Like, all those things force anybody that wants to innovate. And Katie, you mentioned what the principal associate said, hey, here are people that are ready to go. We've been going, and we are always faced with challenges of trying to accommodate the diploma requirements, the credits and the courses and the things like that. And so I think as we go through this, we're actually, as a state now, stifling innovation because of all the things that we've got. And so I'm really pleased that we're going to take a step and try to free this up. And again, what it looks like, right, who knows? But I think the timeline is good. I think we've got to go. And I think the fact that we're allowing people to opt in as early adopters and get some of those people who are ready to go, give them an opportunity to actually innovate is a real positive step in the right direction. So I'm pleased with this. And again, there's, to Katie Mode's point, there's a ton of implementation things that we're going to have to work through. But I think to give local school districts, charter schools, and everybody else the opportunity to take the flexibility, to Byron's point, the flexibility that we are going to offer in what this looks like, and allow them to innovate themselves, I think is a really big step. And I think from a national perspective, we're going to get a lot of attention on this, and we're also going to get put ourselves way ahead of everybody else. So kudos to everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Best. Any other comments from board members?
Last comment
Yes,
I have.
Iris.
I think I've mentioned it before. I really worry about the tech tools that educators have access to and that are mainstream. Right now, all of them, for the most part, are geared to have the teacher be the leader in all instances, the grade books, everything. Like, the teacher has to take the action first. If we're really trying to be a learner-centric state, we have to design education tools that mimic what's available in industry, where it's the actual the student that's the leader and the driver and taking the action. And then slick, easy dashboards. Doing individualized learning is so much more to wrangle as a facilitator or a teacher, and the tools prevent from being scalable to 100, 200 students. So I think about some of the teachers I work with that have 235 students through the course of a semester. There's no way they can be doing individualized learning with fidelity given the current tools that exist.
So what is, and I think that, going back to Mr. Best's point as well as Insightful Solutions' point, I think that's where we're really going to have to push to lead. I don't know that there's a perfect tool out there today. So that's working with our teachers closely to make sure we design something that is helpful to them and to students will be important. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yes, I also wanted to mention, that we really want to be able to make this very learner-centered, and I think one of our biggest obstacles to that is not being able to quite always measure it when we add all of this flexibility all over the place. And I do like what was mentioned on the other slide about Ohio, having the requirement, I think it was for 2 additional seals. So the Diploma Plus options that we are considering, I really do like that idea, because being able to give students additional options to really tailor it to what is going to be beneficial to them later in life, and those things that they're really looking forward to, where they get some of that flexibility within the guidance that we can provide and still be able to measure. I think that would be really helpful. So I'm glad that we're looking at ways to be more flexible, but still be able to measure and make sure that this is going to be beneficial to our students in the future.
Well said, and we might just end right on that. Well said, Erica. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I
So
move
moved.
to adjourn. Yeah. Second. Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much.